This is the Governance Committee meeting of July, May 29th. And pursuant to the requirement
April 29th.
virtual meetings, I will start with the required introduction. So pursuant to the governor's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Paragraph 20, as well as the Select Board's emergency order dated 3/16/2020, the Governance Committee will be using remote participation for this meeting. The audio of this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the town's webpage within 24 hours in accordance with the governor's emergency action requirement of keeping the public informed of actions during the meeting. I would ask that all participants remotely attending this meeting state your name for identification purposes each time you speak throughout the meeting. And at this time, we'll have a roll call attendance of the members of the Governance Committee, starting with Mr.
Present.
Mr. LeBeau,
Present.
Ms. Lingham,
Present.
Mr. McKechnie,
Present.
and Mr. Tyler present. So we're all here. So this is basically a meeting of the Governance Committee to meet with department heads and other members of elected boards that we haven't already met with to really talk about what we're recommending, why we're recommending. There's seems to be a lot of misinformation swirling around. And so we thought, mainly because you're all involved with your respective budgets, either the department or as a member of a, I guess, independently elected board. And since you are involved, and really our recommendation has to do with the budget development process, it made sense to us to really want to have this meeting to hear from you, talk about what we're recommending, why, and hopefully that we learn more. I think we've had a series of these meetings, and I think each time we've learned a little bit more, which has been helpful. And prior to the time of having to submit our recommendation to the town administrator for the town warrant, we have made numerous changes in what we originally recommended as a result of those meetings. So, so we're gonna divide this up among some of all our members. I'm just for the record, Sam Tyler, the chair of the Governance Committee. So I'm going to start with an introduction, but then we'll have members talk about each of the articles. I mean, there's two basic articles on the warrant, Article 9, Article 10, but they deal with more than one bylaw article. And so we're going to try to briefly go through that. You get that sort of review and then open it up for discussion or questions, and hope that we all benefit from this meeting. So I'll just start by talking about the Governance Committee and who we are, what we've been doing. We were established to assist in the development of townwide policies that relate to governance and to recommend changes in the form of government if needed. The committee consists of 5 residents with diverse professional backgrounds and prior experience in Holliston government. I think collectively we represent about 100 years of municipal experience. Each member volunteered for this committee and was appointed by the Select Board with no preconditions. Each has demonstrated a high level of integrity in their professional and public work. The committee's term is for 3 years, which is, and during that time, we have total discretion over the issues we choose to address within our governance charge. We do recognize, given our prior experience and current experience, that local government has become much more challenging and demanding, requiring greater efficiency to meet service demands and changing conditions with basically limited revenue growth. Holliston's budget this fiscal year, fiscal 21, totals about $64.3 million and supports a workforce of, I think, over 800 employees. So it's not a small town operation. The towns that we've looked at, and I'll explain that a little bit more, have responded by increasing trained professionals in town management positions and related governance changes. However, in Holliston's case, the town has not undertaken a comprehensive review of its government structure and efficiency for over 40 years. I mean, it's been 26 years since the town administrator position was created, and it's 33 years since the town agreed to make the town treasurer and town accountant appointed positions as opposed to elected positions. So a lot of time has gone by with not much action on the part of Holliston addressing these greater challenges, which is all the more reason for this committee now. Now in August, we started meeting actually in July, where we had a couple of organizational meetings, and in August, the members voted that a new town bylaw outlining the budget development process in Holliston should be our first initiative. Now, this decision was due primarily to three factors. One, Holliston's current bylaws are basically silent on this topic, which has led in some cases to tension and among department heads, boards, and committees. The hiring of a new town administrator with direct experience in municipal finance, working with an experienced finance team, is a factor, as is the governance committee's extensive review of the charters or general bylaws of numerous, scores of other towns. From that review, we did undertake an analysis of towns we thought were comparable. And from that broader list, we created a list of 15 comparable towns that also adopted charters that included bylaw articles regarding its budget development process. So that was a helpful guide in terms of what a lot of other towns are doing now in terms of their budget process. Beyond that, we did develop a list of 15 of these comparable towns that had such budget bylaws, and we divided those towns up among ourselves so that each was responsible for 3 towns. And what that meant was developing relationships with the town manager or the town administrator of these other towns to learn more about their budget process than really could be learned just from reading a charter or a bylaw, which is not, sometimes doesn't really provide all the information that you need. So we've had 28 meetings since we started, and in between a lot of discussions with town officials or research to take advantage of organizations and state government. And pretty much all these meetings have focused on, budget development. So from basically August till now, we've have focused on this one issue. We'll get to the details in a minute, but our primary recommendation basically is to replace responsibility for the town's budget planning and development with the town administrator and his financial team. So the town administrator and the team would plan and compile a comprehensive budget, the 5-year capital program. The finance committee would exercise its important role of reviewing the budget, making recommendations to town meeting, which is its statutory responsibility. And as I mentioned, we want to have this meeting. We've structured this meeting to learn more about your experience with the budget process, and after hearing about what we're recommending, whether you have any issues you want to raise. So we're going to start with Article 9, which consists of two parts. There's what we're calling the fiscal procedures section of Article 9, which Scott McKechnie is going to provide a quick overview of that. So, Scott?
Thanks, Sam. Scott McKechnie. And just to reiterate a few things that Sam said just a few minutes ago, when we talk to the numerous other towns and other town administrators and whatnot, we took best practices from them. And, it was pretty unanimous across the board that most of the towns see the need for a policy in place or a bylaw for a roadmap. It's for the ever-changing boards and members and committee members. So to have something in place is critical. And one town even pointed to the fact that they had some significant turnover in one particular year, and without the budget policy in place, it would have been a disaster to come up with the policy. But so, to try to keep it short, the general idea is beginning in November, the town administrator, someone from the select board, the finance committee, school committee, get together, call it a summit, talk about, what they see the needs are, what they see the revenue projections might be for the upcoming year. From there, the town administrator would create the guidelines with that input and continued input from the select board and from the finance committee. The town administrator would then work with all the different boards, committees to put together the budget, the draft budget, and would share that budget with the select board. Select board would then have a chance to look at the budgets, noting that the elected budgets are really a pass-through to the extent that they have no say in the budgets, although there is the guidelines, there are the guidelines to adhere to. And from there, the budget would go to the finance committee for their review, so they can make their recommendations to at the town meeting. And a critical piece of this is the finance committee's recommendations to an independent body. And one of the things we heard from the other towns is it makes sense for the town administrator who's in contact with all these departments on a regular basis to put together the budget. It's not the town administrator's budget, it's the town's budget. And to have, shepherd the process and then have the independent finance committee look over the recommendations and make an independent review and recommendations, not really recommendations on a budget that they came up with. I don't know how that could be independent. So that's the long and the short of it. That's the real quick summary. I think everybody has on if they don't have it on our website, is the full description of the process, but that is the summary that I think outlines our recommendation.
This is Sam. Thanks, Scott. And the second part of Article 9 has to do with the Finance Committee. And Len Engel is going to make that presentation.
Hi, everybody. Len Engel. And I'll just touch on some of the changes in the previous bylaw that are in our proposal. The essence of the current Finance Committee bylaw, it remains intact, which is to ensure that the Finance Committee has the authority to approve or to recommend, review and recommend the budget and all financial related warrants at town meeting. And that remains in place. And with some additional information in that section of the bylaw recommendation. A couple of other provisions in the current Finance Committee bylaw have been shifted to the fiscal procedures bylaw in order to make it clearer under the fiscal procedures bylaw of who has responsibility and at what point in the process. In the two primary cases, the access to information necessary to develop the bylaw, that information currently comes to the Finance Committee from other boards, committees, and departments. That will instead, under the proposal, that will go to the town administrator initially, and that is in the fiscal procedures. That's been moved to section 2.3 in the fiscal procedures article. And section 6, which authorizes FinCom to access financial data, financial information from various boards and committees in town. That information, that role or the responsibility is shifted to section 4.1, and it remains the Finance Committee's responsibility. And then the last section of the current Finance Committee bylaw has 3 separate parts. The first 2 have been shifted to the fiscal procedures responsibility or the select board responsibility and bylaw. And the last one has been deleted because we've been advised that it is in conflict with state law. And so that's the changes to the Finance Committee bylaw and the proposal, and glad to answer any questions when we get to it.
I would just add that, our recommendation is really just about the budget process. So issues of how the Finance Committee is selected or anything like that is not part of our recommendation at all. So that completes Article 9. Article 10 has to do with town meetings and basically limited to some changes that reflect on the budget process. And Paul LeBeau will present that section.
All right, thank you, Sam. Paul LeBeau. The proposal under Article 10 first addresses town meetings. We were recommending a few changes with respect to the dates of town meetings. Currently, the May town meeting takes place on the first Monday following the first Friday. We're proposing to change that to the second Monday. The effect of that change is that on average, the town meeting would take place 3 or 4 days later in the year than under current practice. The second change is with the October town meeting. Right now, the bylaw says that it will take place on the last Monday of October, unless that last Monday of October is October 31, Halloween, and then it shifts to the 4th Monday in October. So we're proposing to just say it's going to be the 3rd Monday in October, which moves it up about a week, maybe a little bit more on average on the calendar under our proposal. We've also made some suggested changes in the wording regarding submission of petition articles by citizens, really just to clarify it. It doesn't change the process. The citizens petition process for town meetings is defined by state law. So we're just trying to clarify the language a little bit. The other change we're proposing is to highlight the town's website as being one of the primary locations for notices to the public about town meetings and the warrant and the Finance Committee report. The current language calls for a publication in the form of a legal notice in a local print paper. But I think in this day and age, the vast majority of people access information through the internet. And that seemed like the logical place to highlight these notice requirements. newspapers, as everyone knows, have declined in readership and circulation. And I'm not sure how many people read the legal notices in the first place, but the website is, I think, a more of a go-to point for most people nowadays. The other changes are really kind of minor, doing a little bit of correction of typos and phrasing. The last section of the Article 1 talked about, or next to last section talked about an adjournment and had a typo. So instead of saying 11 p.m., it said number 1, Roman numeral 1, which we were having a hard time finding on a clock face. So we thought we'd straighten that out. But there aren't any changes in terms of the mechanics of town meeting that are laid out in Article 1. That all stays the same, maintains the tradition of the order of motions and the ability of people to speak and so forth. And that is pretty much a summary overview of the changes to Article 1. I don't think these are controversial. I hope they're not controversial. Certainly haven't garnered as much attention as Article 9. And that's about it.
Yeah, that's just Sam. I would also note that, I mentioned that we had met with town officials and, basically the finance officers and the town clerk and the town moderator. But we had one change that we thought would be helpful, only to learn from the town clerk that it had been tried before, but you couldn't do it based on state law. So just one example of how these meetings have helped us refine what we've recommended. So the second part of Article 10 has to do with some minor changes with the select board, but also we're establishing a capital planning committee, and Tina Lingham will take us through that.
Okay, hi, I just want to say hello to everybody. I'm Tina Lingham. Nice to have you here. I want to be brief because I think the best value we can give you is a chance to do Q&A at the end. So as Sam mentioned, there's some changes to Article 3 with regard to the select board, and under appointment authority, the phrase legislative special acts is included to acknowledge that the town administrator's role. The town administrator has a role in the selection process for a key position, and the town administrator is responsible for screening of candidates for the position of police chief, fire chief, and recommending finalists for positions to the select board. And then under section 15, there's a new section added to create an electronic talent bank on the town's website. Again, this is thought of as an update to allow registered voters who are interested in serving the community a chance to express interest and be able to find opportunity to serve the town and join a board, committee, or commission. And this section is added to the select board's bylaw article since the select board makes most of the appointments. And it replaces a bylaw requirement that the finance committee's report contain a page for registered voters to indicate interest in serving, since that was really rarely used. And the capital planning committee that Sam mentioned, the budget development bylaw would provide for new capital planning committee of 5 members to consider the needs, capital needs of the town for the ensuing year, and to develop a 5-year capital improvement plan. The facilities director, school finance official would be ex officio non-voting members. The town accountant is also ex officio a non-voting member. And the committee would submit a draft capital plan to the town administrator, who will issue a recommendation to the select board. And the committee would evaluate, coordinate, prioritize proposed capital improvements and recommend methods of funding improvements. The committee would advise the town administrator and the finance committee. Both will be invited to any capital project presentation before the committee. And this section of the bylaw replaces the capital improvement program bylaw, Article 33, which creates a subcommittee of the finance committee. Thank you.
Okay.
We'll take questions at the end.
This is Sam again. I think that that's sort of a good overview. There's a couple other pieces of information that would be helpful to explain. And, one is that there is a change recommended in that the budget development process would be more led by the town administrator and his financial team, where then capital and operating budgets would be submitted to the select board. The select board would be limited to approving the budgets under its jurisdiction, which is many of the large departments. And then the school committee would approve, the superintendent would submit the school committee budget to the school committee. School committee would have an initial approval of that, not final. A time worked out between the town administrator and the school committee, and their financial officer would determine when the school committee budget would be submitted to the town administrator, who needs to compile the budget to have a sense of what the total expense requirement would be, and then making sure that that matched with the revenue estimates for a balanced budget. But the budgets would then, the select board has a certain amount of time to review its budgets, and then has to submit that to the finance committee. And that would, the school committee budget at that time would also be submitted along with the other independently elected board budgets. So the Board of Health, the library board budget, the town administrator would be involved in just compiling that budget with the rest of the budgets. And then all that would be submitted to the finance committee. So the finance committee work would start after the select board reviews and submits the budget, the comprehensive budget to the finance committee. And so that is a change in the process than what it has been for the last couple of years. And that's an issue that we wanted to raise as well. I think we all recognize that the prior town administrator was not as engaged in the financial management and budget development process. And so that created a void. And fortunately, the finance committee stepped in and assumed more of an active role in the budget development process. We're basically recommending that while we're grateful for the good work of the finance committee, we think that that's a responsibility that should rest with the town administrator, so that the finance committee is able to focus on its statutory authority of review and recommendation, and that if it stayed involved in some of the budget development, that would be inconsistent with its statutory authority. And so that's a change that we think would be in the longer term best interest of the town. And frankly, what we're seeing in other towns and how they've reacted to the more challenging atmosphere that municipal government is now in, is by making these changes. So we've been able to really review a significant number of towns that have the kind of structure that we're recommending. And it's frankly even a structure that's recommended by the Massachusetts Association of Town Finance Committees in their handbook. So with that, I guess that sort of completes our presentation. We'd be happy to take any questions, or if you have other issues you'd like more information on, let us know. Chief.
First of all, I'd like to thank the committee. I have been able to sit in the back of the room virtually for several of your meetings, and the ones that I wasn't able to attend in real time, I often watched the recording later on, and I recognize the work that you've done and your due diligence. I just want to go on record stating that I am 100% in support of both Article 9 and 10. As a longtime department head, one who's been involved in the budget development process for many, many years. I wholeheartedly support the premise of department heads working, or members of boards and committees working directly with professional staff, because as a department head who's been to a lot of meetings over the years, I certainly have observed firsthand what I would characterize as disparate treatment, in that some departments were not treated the same way that other departments or committees or boards were. And I think that by leaving a lot of the budget development nuts and bolts to professional staff and those who are tasked day to day with understanding and tracking the finances of the town, I think that that's a really good move. And also with regards to the capital planning committee, I think that that's great the way it's being proposed, because that is also an area where I have seen some departments' requests being treated very different than other departments' requests, and it's very frustrating. So I think that leveling the playing field and removing some of the personalities and some of the struggles that have occurred as boards and committees change and staff changes, I think that what you're proposing is great, and I look forward to voting affirmatively on both articles.
Well, thank you. You made a couple points that I think we'd like to react to, and I'll start by saying, you mentioned that their officials come and go, and part of the purpose of the recommendation, and as Scott had indicated, also advice from other town administrators or town managers, is having a structure in place that lays out the process that would then be followed by town officials who may be elected, newly elected, or newly appointed, or new to the town. And I think we also had heard that when there was the search process for town administrator, the head of the search firm that was working with the committee indicated that the candidates were concerned that there was nothing they could read that identified or described the budget development process, which is felt to be a weakness. And I think we've heard from some towns that, their town administrator would not have come to their town if they didn't have such a structure in place that was laid out in a bylaw or a charter. So I think that's part of why we felt it was important to provide a lot more information in terms of the process, the budget process, than currently exists. Because it is lacking. I don't know if anybody else on the committee would like to react to the chief's comments.
This is Len Engel. Chief, thank you for those comments. And I think that really important point about the professional staff that's here. We pay them for a job and for these responsibilities, and we might as well take advantage of it. And they have experience that is really important, and it's for the town. It's in the town's best interest to take advantage of that. So, thanks for pointing that out.
Hey, Sam, it's Scott. And Chief, I would add one more thing. You know, the feedback we've been hearing from boards, from the finance committee, from the school committee is all thumbs up and very positive with Travis, our existing town administrator. So, I mean, that speaks volumes that he hasn't gone through the budget cycle with us. Yet all of so far, the feedback has been tremendous. And that speaks, that says a lot about, you know, who we have in place. And I think what we're suggesting is let's use that expertise to its fullest.
All right, let me just say, if anybody else would like to speak, if you want to put go to, where is
Looks
it?
like Carla.
Participants.
Alfred.
Hand up as Carla Alfred has. So Carla, you're next.
I'm the vice chair of the Library Board of Trustees. Thank you for having us here today. And I do want to reiterate the notion we all at the library love Travis. He has been doing great work for us. But I do have a question because we're a small board. In a small department, we usually stay within guideline, but I know that there have been years where we've had things moved or we've had to make changes because of we need a balanced budget going to town meeting. So my question is, the budget goes through, who makes the final changes and cuts if it's not balanced to get that to town meeting?
Well, this is Sam. I think one of the points that we wanted to make was that even though we're recommending a change, sort of who is developing the budget and presenting, or at least compiling the budget. Actually, that's not our change. That's in the 1994 Special Act. That's the responsibility of the town administrator to receive the information of the various budgets and compile the budget. And I think throughout the process, while it may be more directed by the town administrator, there are a number of spots where even in the bylaw, there's a requirement that, you know, there would be consultation with the finance committee. So and the bylaw is not going to be able to, you know, pinpoint every step in the process, but we're expecting, and I think Travis has already demonstrated his collaborative approach to government, that administrator and the finance committee would be working on an ongoing basis collaboratively. And when the town administrator compiles the budget, and if it shows that there's imbalance, that would be sort of a signal for both the town administrator and the finance committee of needing to make changes, which I would expect, you know, that they would do, you know, cooperatively.
Okay, so that's what happens now. But going forward, who holds the red pen at the end of the day and strikes out the item that needs to change?
Well, I would say it would be basically the town administrator, and if the finance committee in the end can't reconcile that, then they have the opportunity to go to town meeting.
So it's still on the finance
Right,
committee.
let me finish, please. They
Go
have
ahead.
the right to go to town meeting and make a recommendation for a change.
So then what is the change you're requesting here if the select board isn't making that decision with the town administrator, if it's still the finance committee?
No, I'm saying that it would be, I mean, the town administrator is responsible for compiling the budget. The select board approves only the budgets that are under their jurisdiction. So it really would, I think, fall on the town administrator to identify, and again, working with the finance committee, if you know, as to how to address that imbalance. But in the end, you know, well, in the end, you know, right now, I guess with this plan, in the end, the town administrator would be submitting the budget to town meeting, and the finance committee report would have that budget and then identify any areas where it disagrees and recommendations it would make for a different number.
So it doesn't go to the select board? The select board's not recommending it to town meeting, it's the finance committee still? Because I thought the big change was that it's going from the finance committee is there to advise, not send it through like they currently do, and that the select board would be the ones presenting the budget.
Paul LeBeau, if I could.
Yep.
The way we envision this is that the town meeting would still get a report that would show the requests coming from the various departments, and would also show the recommended amounts per the finance committee. So that if there are any differences in those figures, then ultimately town meeting makes a final decision on what the budget amount is. As the process evolves prior to town meeting, we're suggesting that the town administrator, along with the professional staff, takes a bigger role in the mechanics of assembling a comprehensive budget that then goes to the select board and the finance committee. The select board for purposes of reviewing the departments under their jurisdiction, the finance committee for the purposes of reviewing all departments throughout the town. The mechanical process of assembling the budget would be done by the professionals. I think in this day and age, it's a basic premise that all groups, select board, finance committee, school committee, town administrator, they all recognize that the budget has to be balanced. You know, expenditures cannot exceed revenues. So that is a basic premise that everyone is working with throughout the process. So if there are any differences among these groups as to the amount of a budget, it doesn't necessarily mean that approving a higher amount would knock the budget out of balance. What it may mean is that there is more use of reserves or less use of reserves. It's a difference in priorities, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the budget then becomes out of balance. In the rare occasion, because the whole process is predicated on best estimates of revenues, the big question mark being the final state aid figure, and to some extent, new growth. Those numbers do not become final till after the May town meeting. So in the unusual circumstance where there is a big disruption in a revenue source, let's say the state cuts state aid by a tremendous amount due to some economic circumstance, that could knock the budget out of whack after May town meeting has made its decisions. Then it becomes incumbent on the parties to work out a way of reducing the budgets and getting approval for those reductions at the October town meeting. And the October town meeting would have a similar process where the departments would have their budget amounts that they were voted at May town meeting, and the finance committee would be making a recommendation as to how those budgets should be adjusted in order to bring everything into balance. But that would be a very rare circumstance. Typically, everyone is working with the best information they have from the beginning of the process through the May town meeting. And the basic premise is that the budget is going to be balanced.
Okay, I'm very familiar with the budget process. I've been on the board for several years, but there have been years, and again, we rarely go over, but there have been years where we've had to make adjustments, and it has been the finance committee who has come back and said, you know, the town, we need to balance the budget, so we're recommending this and that and the next thing to all the boards, and that's fine. And then it's their budget that goes to town meeting. So is it going to be the select board's budget? Is it going to be the FinCom's budget that goes to town meeting to be voted on? Is my question. Who's making the final recommendation? Who's the one coming to us and saying, you need to get rid of this? Or I know Travis is very involved and he's been excellent, but I want to know what I'm voting on as a person, like as a voter.
Mhm.
Whose budget?
you will see, as you do now, the amount requested by each department and the recommended amount from the finance committee. That will not change. That report will go out to the town as it does now. And I think, if I recall correctly, the library is in a somewhat different situation in that there is a state guideline around how much the library budget is from year to year. And I'm trying to go back 6 or 7 years now in my mind, but there were times when we had to file some sort of a statement with the state explaining why the library budget was not within a certain guideline, state guideline.
Okay. I don't know if that's happened in my time, but I do want to look into that more because I find that interesting. But so my board is concerned that the person or the people with the final say are a board that has independent budgets and interests. And as a small board, we don't want things being cut because of other projects.
Right.
And I'm speaking for my whole board, we've discussed this, and that is the chief concern, that as a small department with a small budget where dollars go a long way, any bit that gets crossed out is usually pretty big impact to us. But I want to make sure that the people drawing a line through the thing we have to cut to get to that balanced budget are not people who have skin in the game, who have money that goes to their departments and projects as well.
Okay, yeah, and Paul LeBeau, I think we said, perhaps not clear enough, was that with respect to independently elected boards, those budgets are going to go to the finance committee, and the finance committee is going to make a recommendation on them. The selectmen don't have any jurisdiction over those particular budgets because they are the budgets of separately elected, independently elected boards and committees. And just, if I could, as a resident and consumer, I want to applaud the trustees, and particularly Leslie, for the ways that you are making books and other media available to the public in a variety of forms. And I'm also been very impressed with the way that you folks have dealt with the pandemic and still made everything available to the community.
Leslie has been.
Thank you.
We were the first library to have curbside in the area, and Leslie made it all happen. So hats off to her and her team. Okay, that wasn't my understanding of, I guess I'm going to go back and do a little more reading on this, because to me, it sounds like for an independent board, nothing in our process is changing. The select board's not going to be involved in our budget. It's going to be the town administrator helping Leslie. We're going to vote on it, and it's going to go to the FinCom for advisement, and then it's going to go to town meeting.
Paul LeBeau, yes, that's right.
So what is the change then? I'm gonna have to figure that out. I guess
This is Tina Lingham. I think that the biggest change is where the budget is initiated from. It wouldn't be initiated by FinCom. It would be initiated by, I know people have used the word professional, but full-time town staff, like the town administrator would then generate the budget. But it is a very collaborative process with the select board and with FinCom.
Lovely to-
So Carla, if I may just give one more response, it's the town administrator is going to be the shepherd, who's going to consolidate the budget, put it together. And then the finance committee independently, so they're not creating the budget, they're going to independently review the recommendations of the town administrator / select board, it's their budget, to the town at the town meeting. That's called checks and balances. One will prepare it, the other will review it, and then it's going to go to the townspeople to vote on it. That's a simple approach, what we're trying to put together.
Yes, but that's what we do now. So I'm asking why the need for the bylaw change.
it's not the town administrator putting the budget together now. It's right now, at the last several years, it's been the finance committee putting the budget together. And we're suggesting that they do their review of the budget, but the full-time staff put the budget together, and the volunteer staff of the finance committee review when it's done and make the recommendations to town.
Also, Tina Lingham, the biggest difference is that there's nothing written down about that budget development process. That's why we're proposing a bylaw.
Clarity.
Okay, well, I appreciate having things in writing. That I certainly do.
This is Leslie. I just wanted to say that the piece that's different is having us go over the budget with the town administrator. That was missing before. And having worked in a town with a town manager, I was really used to that. And I was surprised when I came to Holliston and that piece was not there. I think it's an important piece. I also like to reiterate what Mike brought up. And I think it would make the relationship between the town administrator and the department's head stronger. So I think this is really a good idea. But that's the piece that's missing right now, is going over the budget with the town administrator, which I think is really important. If nothing else, he'll know more of the nitty gritty of what we're dealing with, what we're trying to fund, the choices that we have to make. So I agree with Mike. I think this is a good idea.
Agreed. And I do think that, I know we're not making any rules or passing anything based on the role of one hired individual, but we have seen a vast improvement in our department, at least, with Travis. And I just want to, I guess I can ask it as closely. I just want to know, it's his role to change the budget before town meeting. It's not the select board. It's not the FinCom after this bylaw. It's Travis or whoever follows him, their role to change it, not any other board.
Not sure what you mean by change it. Could you?
If there needs to be cuts, who makes the cuts? You're saying it's the town administrator, not the FinCom or the select board.
Needs to make cuts.
Well, this is Sam. I mean, basically the recommendation would have the select board submitting the budget to the town meeting. But
So
it would
the
really,
select board's making the cuts.
I didn't say that. But it would be basically the town administrator working with the finance committee that would work out how to balance that budget before it is submitted to town meeting. And if for some reason there's not an ability to do that, the finance committee will include in its report, its recommendation is instead of the budget that's been submitted. I mean, there is an expectation that there will be a collaborative approach throughout this whole process, that Travis will be responsible for compiling the budget. And that identifies if there's a problem with any of the budgets, or that budget has a problem that needs to be addressed in some ways. And would be the expectation that he and the finance committee would try to work collaboratively to figure out a solution to that. The end result is and then there's a final meeting between the select board and the finance committee. If there's, which I think we thought of as advisable, if there's any last minute issues that aren't reconciled, between Travis and the finance committee, the committees would be able to do that before, the budget was submitted to town meeting.
So if they can't reconcile it, but we need to bring a balanced budget to town meeting, the select board does what? I'm big on collaboration. I'm a teacher, but I know that it doesn't always work out. So my concern is that the person making the very final changes is a person, is a a 3-member board with their own personal projects. And I want to make sure that my tiny department doesn't have some kind of drastic impact to their budget because someone else wanted their personal thing over mine.
Paul LeBeau, if I could. The library is independently elected, separately elected.
Mhm.
The town administrator really can't unilaterally cut the budget of an independently elected group. However, the town administrator early on in the process can sit down with the library folks, get educated on the budget requests coming from the library, and perhaps make some suggestions on adjustments, having in mind the overview of the entire budget, what revenues are available, what amount of money is available for expenditures. But the library trustees ultimately decide what their budget request is going to be. And that ends up in front of the finance committee. The finance committee can make a recommendation for a different amount of money for the library for whatever reason. Ultimately, if the library feels strongly about their budget and disagrees with the suggestions of the town administrator and the recommendations of the finance committee, the library trustees can go to town meeting and say, here's why we believe we should have X amount of money in our budget, not Y amount that's being recommended by somebody else. And town meeting makes the decision. That's kind of the ultimate scenario of walking through the process. I think it's a bit confusing to talk about a balanced budget. That is, as I said, is a basic premise that drives the process. And in a $63 million budget, $5,000 one way or the other in a particular department doesn't, quote, knock the budget out of balance. Really, effectively, what is happening is that maybe a little bit more money is being drawn from reserves than otherwise would be the case, but it's not necessarily resulting in the budget being in excess of the available money. So it's a bit of a confusing way of looking at it. I know that people talk about it all the time, but it's more a question of how funds are being utilized and distributed, and whether an advisable amount of money is being kept in reserve.
Okay.
Chief Cassidy.
Thank you, Chief Cassidy. Yeah, and just to follow up on a couple of the points that Carla made, that's exactly the kind of disparate treatment that I was referencing in my comments earlier. And I have seen that over the years where smaller departments or independent boards or committees, although they may have met the guideline or been very close to the guideline, by a committee of 7, were then told that they needed to cut their budget more, while other larger departments that had a much more behemoth starting guideline were given well in excess of the guideline that had been published. So this is why, again, looking to level the playing field and allowing the professionals to address how it is that we reach, an appropriate proposal for town meeting to vote on is why I'm in favor of it, to remove the exact thing that you were referencing, which is sometimes people who are on elected boards may have preferences towards one department or another, whereas a hired professional who is helping to compile the budget can be a little bit more agnostic.
I agree and appreciate your view on that, Chief Cassidy, because we at the library have discussed such things. And we have small asks now, but we also have a building that's prone to breaking down, and we have discussed the potential for needing a new building or bigger asks, and that's a problem once you start asking for more or needing more. But, and I 1000% agree that Travis should be involved. He is a professional. He is great. The town administrator, this should be a role in going forward, hiring one. This is something that we should look for and expect. My concern is one that you echoed about the finance committee applies to the select board as well. And they are just smaller and they also have their own personal projects. So I just want to make sure that if we're saying it's the town administrator, that it is honestly and really the town administrator's budget going forward, not the select board or the finance committees. Mary has her hand up.
Sam, you want to call on the next person?
Oh, are you going to answer Carla?
Yeah, we should answer Carla first.
Oh, sorry, I saw Carla pointing at Mary.
Oh, I didn't know if it was commentary or reiteration.
Can I just jump in and try something a little different? Just try.
Go for it.
If the budget, when the budget goes to the select board at the very last minute and they're sitting down in a hearing or meeting or whatever with the town administrator and the finance committee, I'm just reiterating, but the only budgets that they can cut are the ones that they are related to, that they oversee. But because they oversee so much money, they're probably the most likely places to be cut, or at least they should be the starting point, I suppose. So that's the reason it goes to the select, or not the reason, but a part of the reason is that they can help with whatever that last minute conversation is, because they have so much, so many departments that they do fund. But they don't have the authority to then turn around and cut from the library or anybody else. They can't. You're elected just as much as they are. You know, that's just the law. So in that final analysis, and the town administrator, you know, the town administrator doesn't have the authority to do it either, really. So then the bottom line is it has to be by collaboration. And if there's a dispute, it goes to town meeting to resolve it. And the townspeople get to decide. But that's what we have for a flat organization. And the voters are at the top, and then the likes of you and me and all the elected officials in town, we're on the next layer. And we're just trying to do the policy and oversee the staff and kind of make things happen. But I can't tell your board what to do any more than you can tell mine. And I can't touch your budget and you can't touch mine, and neither can the select board. So it could, no matter what you call it the budget. I don't know. I am a little bit, I don't even know why it has to have a name. Why isn't it just the annual budget? Does it have to be labeled by somebody's department? Can't it just be Holliston's annual budget? But I'm not going there. I'm not going there.
Someone has to make that decision, right? At the end of the day.
I know.
I don't envy that person. I'm on the library board of trustees, none of these other boards, and there's a good reason why.
Anyway, so that was just my thought, just to try to reiterate, but to say it in a little bit different words, just that be reassured, the select board cannot, no matter what, at the last minute, in any way, shape, or form, slide in a cut or move money, or whatever.
Well, thank you, Mary. I do value your input and your wisdom.
All right, Chief Cassidy has his hand up again, so.
Thank you, Chief Cassidy. Yeah, and to just build on what Mary is saying, I think some of this may be word choice, and sometimes we are limited in government as to how we can explain a process. But I think what some people are getting hung up on when they hear that it's the select board that's sending the final budget to town meeting, I believe statutorily that's by virtue of the fact that it's the select board that opens the warrant, and it's the select board that publishes the warrant that has the articles for consideration, including the omnibus budget. So I think it already has a name, and it's not called the select board's budget. It's not called, anything but the omnibus budget and whatever article it is at that specific town meeting. So again,
From the warrant, isn't it?
no, it's an article within the warrant.
Oh. Right.
So I believe that really what we're talking about is the reason that it's the select board that's sending the budget to town meeting is because they're the only ones that can put an article on town meeting outside of a petition article.
Okay, so playing devil advocate here, if names don't matter and it's just the town of Holliston's budget, and it's, why does it need to change? Why does the process, why is there even a recommended? I agree that something should be put in writing, but we didn't do studies on other towns and look for processes that are more authentic, or not authentic, more specific to what we're looking to change for nothing. And not just to say that this responsibility should be more towards the town administrator. Because it sounds like everybody's trying to say that nothing's really changing for the library, but then you're asking me to vote on a change that affects the library.
How do you see it affecting? I don't belong here, I know, but it's just like,
You belong here, you're a Holliston resident.
I suppose, but how do you see it affecting you? I would love to understand this because it may have to be.
It's who's going to help change our budget if we have to get bigger, if we have to have larger asks and we have to make cuts, then it's not just coming from the town administrator. It's not just coming at the recommendation of the FinCom. It's also coming at the recommendation of the select board, who currently is not involved in the independent board's budget to this extent, and has their own projects that are about on par with ours.
Sorry, how do you see them coming involved in your budget?
They're the ones making the budget, or not making the budget. They're the ones recommending it to town hall. It's them sending it.
They're going to send whatever that final budget is. That's all they're doing, is they're sending it. They've always sent it. That's not new. The biggest thing that's new is memorializing the fact that Travis is the one who's going to run around between departments and do the kind of thing that that Leslie was talking about. He's always had, or the town administrators always had to have conversations with the boards and departments that fit into the select board.
So does Travis report to the select board then? Is that his
Yes, Travis reports to the select board. And I guess to some degree, there has to be a level of trust about a professional doing a job like that he's never going to do anything that's going to jeopardize his own career by doing something that would be inappropriate. So could they tell him what? What are they going to say? Cut the library? He can't cut the library.
Well, I have no, I would hope that nobody would be nefarious, but I just, and again, I've had great experiences with him, but we all know what a lousy town administrator can do too. And I just want to make sure that we don't have someone who's a people pleaser trying to make his bosses happy. And
but what can he do? So what are you thinking he would do?
I don't think Travis personally would do anything.
Let's make believe it's a nefarious person. What would he might do?
Make just like Chief Cassidy was concerned about with some boards getting preference, making sure that the select board projects and budgets get filled first before, our needs for paint and rugs in the library.
So, but that goes to the finance committee.
Can the finance committee then change it or?
I guess it would be the same as what they do now.
Okay.
I mean, that's exactly the same. None of that has changed. So it would be however they view that is, I don't know. I don't know what the words they use because I think we don't always use the same words.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but that process hasn't changed.
Paul LeBeau, it sounds as though perhaps part of the concern is not necessarily with the operating budget, but with maybe the improvements to the building or that kind of thing.
No, I know I just gave a poor example. That wasn't, I just used the words that came to my head as my kids are like pounding down the door for dinner. So I know how our budget works and where the money comes from.
But I guess if the concern is with the budget, then as a separately elected group, you have the protection of knowing that a town administrator or a board of selectmen, or not even the finance committee, can unilaterally cut your budget. However, if there's a disagreement as to what amount that budget should be, then the town meeting will be presented with competing figures. One being the request and the second being the recommendation of the finance committee. In the area of capital, what we're proposing is a new 7 or 8 person committee. The voting members of the committee will be town officials, but the ex officio members of the committee will include the facilities manager. And I think that is a critical change because the facilities manager has a kind of a universal view of the buildings and the needs of the buildings throughout the town, and can make recommendations to the capital committee about priorities based on the needs of the buildings as he has assessed them. So that capital committee will then make a recommendation on a capital program to the town administrator, and the town administrator will make a recommendation on a capital program to the finance committee and the board of selectmen. Ultimately, capital projects that are presented to town meeting receive a recommendation one way or the other from the finance committee. Should they be funded? Should they not be funded? Should they be postponed? Should they perhaps be funded at a different amount of money? So I think both of those processes protect the independence of an elected committee's financial interests, but also provide for a process whereby those requests can be analyzed and a recommendation can be made.
Thank you for your time, and this has helped me understand better what is being recommended. I have a bleeding child, so I'm gonna go. She pulled a tooth out. It's fine. But I do appreciate all of your time, and I know you've put a lot into this. So thank you. I'm going to continue listening. I do have to turn off my
We'll
camera.
send
Thank you for your good questions.
Oh, Paul, this is Leslie. Could you say again where the capital planning committee is coming from? Which I think it's a great idea. Who will it be made up of?
I don't know if Tina, if you want to take that one, since you've been doing the presentations on that.
Yes, I would like to take that one. Hang on, because I had that PowerPoint pulled up, but I think it is 5 registered voters. Hang on, let me just look at it. It's 5 members. Okay, are you there? Great. So let's see, the capital planning committee would consist of 5 members, and they are, it doesn't specifically say, but I believe it's 5 members, but that includes a facilities director and a school finance official who are ex officio non-voting members. The town accountant is also ex officio non-voting member. So Sam, maybe you can clarify. So how many townspeople would be on the capital planning committee then?
Paul LeBeau, if I recollect it correctly, it would be a member of the board of selectmen, member of the finance committee, member of the school committee, and a member of the planning board. And I'm sorry, but the fifth one escapes me.
A person, this is Sam, I don't know if you said this, Paul,
Moderator, yeah.
a resident appointed by the moderator, town moderator.
Yeah, so those would be the 5 voting members. We initially proposed in one of our drafts that the town accountant, the facilities manager, and the school financial official also be voting members. But we heard some feedback, some concern that those 3 officials may not necessarily be town residents. So there was a little bit of concern about whether they should have a voting status or not. So they stay on the committee ex officio without the voting capacity. But we felt very strongly that the facilities manager and the school finance official should have some input because of their familiarity with all of the facilities. We're using that school finance official, which is kind of an awkward term because we initially said school business manager, but then somebody said, well, what if that position's title changes in the future or what have you? But what we really mean is the school business manager who has a good handle on the condition and the needs of the various town school facilities. And together with the facilities manager, they could really provide a lot of insight to the capital committee on the status of all of the town's buildings and their needs, and perhaps help them prioritize going forward.
All right, I don't see anybody else with a hand up. Anybody else want to comment?
Paul LeBeau, just while we have the opportunity, I want to express appreciation for all of the work of the fire chief during the pandemic. I almost, but not quite, got sick of seeing him on Zoom meetings with the selectmen and the finance committee. It was like a Monday, Tuesday. You could count on it like clockwork, but thank you to him and to, I'm sure, many other folks, as I mentioned, Leslie and the library trustees and many others in town government who have had to deal with the most unusual situation and seem to have done so with great professionalism and great dedication. And it's appreciated as just your average little old resident here.
Carla Alfred, I'll second that. We still rely on your updates on all the boards I'm on. We value seeing your face, although maybe it would be a little less frequent would be good.
Just want to thank you all for being here today and also for your support.
Right, well, any other questions anybody else would like to ask? Or any comments that anybody would like to make? So I think this was mentioned earlier by Scott, but we do have a web page on the town website, and it contains many different articles. It actually contains a fact sheet of 2 pages on what we're recommending for town meeting. It also includes Article 9 and Article 10, but in sort of color coded, so it's a little easier to read what the differences are in terms of what's being recommended, what stays the same, what's added, what's taken out for each of the articles that are within Article 9 and Article 10. So, and then there's also a list of other documents that we have included on our web page. So, a lot more information can be available there. And we have another public hearing. This wasn't a public hearing. This is just really a meeting with department heads and others, but we have a public hearing scheduled for next week that, for one last time to hear from people, although what we've commended is already locked in, but it's still worthwhile, because there's a lot of different information out there about what we are recommending. We felt it would be helpful to have that opportunity for anybody that had questions to be able to ask those questions and get answers from the committee before town meeting. So if there is no other questions or no other issues, anybody, on this Zoom meeting would like to talk about, I guess we're at a point of adjourning the meeting. So to do that, we go through the roll call again.
I didn't realize I was on mute. This is Scott McKechnie. I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
I'm smiling because this is the routine we go through every time. All right, Mr. Engel,
Aye.
Mr. LeBeau,
Aye.
Ms. Lingham,
Aye.
Mr. McKechnie,
Aye.
Mr. Tyler, aye. Okay, this meeting of the Governance Committee is adjourned, and thank you all for participating and joining us.